Good morning. I'm Paolo Carlini. I'm the team leader of the Research Network and Support Facility, an EU-funded project on the informal economy. And we've been doing a series of webinars on topics related to the informal economy. This is the fourth webinars. The first one was dedicated to the definition, to defining the informal economy sector, while the second was focused on key policies and approaches to tackle the informal economy. Then we had a third one. The previous one was dedicated on social protection, especially how to extend social protection mechanisms to informal workers. Today, we are going to address another key topic of the informal economy, how to organize and mobilize informal workers. We have with us today Berman, our communication expert, and we have Jacques Charme. Jacques is our research expert. He's an economist and statistician, and he was the director of the research at the Institute of Research for Development in Paris. He has been working on the informal economy since 1975, working on the definition, the measurement, and also on analyzing the functioning of the informal economy. Before starting, I will leave 5 minutes to Pierre to explain to participants, especially for the new ones, how the webinar works and how they can interact during the webinar, how they can ask a question or make a comment. So please, Pierre, if you want to explain some technical details about this platform, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Paolo. First of all, welcome to everybody, and thank you for your participation, and a special thanks for those of you who had already participated to the previous webinars. I see a few familiar names. Following the introduction by Paolo, so as he was saying, there will be some intervention by Paolo and Jacques during this webinar. I will be in charge here of helping your participation to the webinar. You will have the possibility to participate per writing during the webinar, during the presentation, and to ask questions, to make comments, and they will be collected and addressed mostly at the end of the two presentations. This time, we have decided to let more space for all the questions and debates, so you will have plenty of time if you want to participate directly to the webinar. How can you participate? You can participate through the chat box. You should be able to see it on the panel control on your right of the GoToWebinar software. You also have the possibility to ask questions. So there is another question. There is a question box you can use. We will, in both cases, use them to collect all your questions and comments. You will also, if you have any problem at any time in terms of hearing, writing, or connecting, you can contact me by email. You should have, I think you have it, but also in the chat box and in the question box. You can also, if you want to ask your question orally, you have the possibility to do it at the end of the webinar. There is a feature called Raise Your Hand. You should see a small hand somewhere in the control panel. Where I see that some of you have already used this feature, we will use it at the end of the webinar, and we can give you directly the possibility to speak, to ask directly your question. I'm not sure we will be able to address all the questions asked during the webinar. The question which will not be addressed will be addressed on our website. You have all the details in the emails you have received when you registered. We will be glad to answer all the questions and comments you will make during this webinar, during the on our website. just a final note. At the end, there will be a quick, less than 3-minute survey to tell us what you have thought about the webinar. We will be glad if you can join the ISF group, which is our committee of practice dedicated to the informal economy. We are present on the Capacity for Dev, the platform, the European platform for development. We are also present on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. And we will share with you also the link to register to the next webinar, which will take place on December 6th. I hope that you will have a great webinar. And once again, if you have any issue during the webinar, do not hesitate to contact me. Paolo?
Thank you, Pierre, for your explanation. And okay, going to the webinar, to the topic of the day, organizing and mobilizing informal workers. I will give the floor to Jacques to address this very relevant topic for the informal economy. Please, Jacques.
Thank you, Paolo. So the topic of today is organizing and mobilizing informal workers. And as you remember from the previous webinars, organizing is a transversal issue, and finally a basic policy for tackling the informal economy. So next slide, please. So organizing is central to the holistic approach for policies targeting the informal economy. It is central because it is key for financing, it is key for extending social protection, it is key for being taken into account as a player in the value chains. It is key for gaining visibility and voice and having rights recognized. And finally, it is key for gaining self-esteem and confidence when facing public authorities. So you see that all these aspects have already been taken into account in our previous presentations. So organizing does not start from scratch. In fact, most societies have self-help groups that exist since a long time among the vulnerable populations. Through these self-help groups, they exchange workforce, for instance, for cropping in peasant societies, or they can save their meager daily receipts for further access to credit, such as in organizations as the Tontines in West Africa or Merry-Go-Round in Eastern and Southern Africa. In other places, some kinds of cooperatives continue to exist that have been implemented, for instance, in rural areas, in order to facilitate the delivery of fertilizers or other agricultural inputs, or to facilitate the outflow of crops. Except in some situations where the creation of grassroots organization is a fundamental starting point, and this is the case for domestic workers, for instance. In most situations, the action regarding organization will therefore consist in the support to pre-existing forms of organizations in order to strengthen them, to disembed them from their possible blockages or from their lack of resources. So organizing is key for financing. Many community-based organizations are created and implemented in order to initiate saving and lending groups. Because pooling resources helps increasing access to financing. They are the background upon which public actors or civil society organizations can build broader policies towards delineating more ambitious strategies for supporting micro businesses or cooperatives, or for achieving universal health or social protection coverage, or more generally for transitioning from the informal to the formal economy. Organizing is key for extending social protection. In the informal economy, where most workers are self-employed, community-based organizations gather into larger saving and lending groups. And the first step towards regular and adapted contribution to mutual funds, ensuring health coverage and other risks that fit with the needs of populations. Organizing is also key for being taken into account as a player in the value chains. Seizing opportunities in value chains requires from producers at the bottom of the chains they become organized. Community-based organizations, eventually supported by government actions or NGOs, are generally the starting point towards increasing quantities collected, and their quality. These are the required conditions to be in a better position to negotiate with the intermediaries or with the multinationals firms in order to receive better prices and gain more room in the global value chains. Organizing is key for gaining visibility and voice and having their rights recognized. Collective action is the origin and purpose of trade unions and employers' associations in the formal economy. And the informal economy, operators and workers need to follow the footprints of their predecessors in the formal sector who can help in this regard. And finally, organizing is key for gaining self-esteem and confidence when facing public authorities. Not only numbers, but also self-confidence is necessary to gain voice and visibility. One among the recurrent difficulties encountered by populations dependent on the informal economy, and especially women, but not only, is their shame when posing their problems or requests to the administration when they go to the office or desks of the various administrations. Organizing is a means towards acquiring self-esteem and confidence with the life skills attached to behavioral experiences in public when organizing collectively around the main issues faced by the community of belonging. There are two levels of actions. The first and typical one is at the grassroots or local level. It's the type of action toward organizing informal workers that refers to local or sectoral development projects, donor or government funded, that try to rely on or revitalize pre-existing self-help groups in order to help communities in self-financing or contributing to social protection schemes, or more generally, giving visibility and voice, confidence and self-esteem. But a major important level of action, which is illustrated by two organizations such as SEWA or WIGO, is the attempt to intervene at global level, regional, national, or international, and political levels in support of the recognition of informal workers' rights. Examples of such actions refer to workers such as waste pickers, domestic workers, street vendors, and transport workers. In other words, all these informal workers who are not geographically located in places where they can meet together and who are especially vulnerable. There are different forms of collective actions. Informal workers who are increasingly self-organizing and getting organized, according to WIGO. Informal workers through organizations such as unions, cooperatives, or associations that are engaged in bargaining, negotiating and advocating, mobilizing and campaigning, production and marketing, and mutual aid and self-help. The objective is to increase voice collectively through organizing and representation in policy making, rule setting, collective bargaining, and negotiating processes.
So, thank you, Jacques. We've seen in these initial slides, in this initial part of your presentation, how organizing is strictly linked to different problems of the informal economy, because organizing is a way to make the workers, the informal workers, visible and give them a voice. It is a way also to improve their bargaining power. It's a way to access social protection, to increase dialogue with the institution. And we've seen that it's important to recognize the grassroots organization that already exists, but also to scale up this organization at different levels. You have said something about two different kinds of actions, grassroots level and global level, and how this is important. So I would like to understand from your point of view what we have learned from experiences, what are the actors involved, what they have been doing, and what we can learn in terms of good practices for future implementation of action that wants to address the issue of how to organize and mobilize informal workers.
Yes, all our project, RNSF, is centered around the good practices in grassroots and local projects. So the main issue is a problem of scaling up from these grassroots levels to more global issues and objectives. And in this field, there are two major actors in the field of organizing. Next slide, please. These two major actors are SEWA and WIGO. The Self-Employed Women Association, SEWA, in India, was founded in 1970 as a set of cooperatives and was recognized as a trade union in 1983. With today more than 2 million members, SEWA is the largest trade union of informal workers in the world, and it pursues joint strategies of struggling by collective bargaining, negotiations, campaigns, and advocacy, but also developing financial services. It is in fact a major microfinance institutions, just like the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, but also involved in providing social services, housing services, and basic infrastructure services. And it is also involved in training and capacity building. As a trade union, SEWA struggled towards the adoption of the Convention on Home-Based Workers in 2008, as well as the Convention on the Domestic Workers in 2011. And as a cooperative, it is organized around 4 sources of security in security: security at work, income security, food security, and social security. WIGO is an international network. WIGO stands for Women in Formal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing. It was founded in 1997 with SEWA as one of its founding members. It is an international network of membership-based organizations, activists, practitioners from development agencies, researchers, statisticians that focus on securing livelihoods for the working poor, especially women, in the informal economy. And by the way, I was one of the founding members of WIGO and in charge of the statistics in the end of the 1990s. So WIGO aims at creating change by building capacity among informal workers' organizations, expanding the knowledge base, and influencing local, national, and international policies. And I would add here that it is thanks to WIGO that today we have some global statistics regarding the informal economy in all regions around the world and in many countries. It is because we have tried to collect this information and to have them available for policymakers and for governments and for trade unions and for grassroots-based organization. It was an important part of our actions. One of the main objectives of WIGO has been to support the development of membership organizations, trade unions, cooperatives, and worker organizations that are democratic and representative, as well as national and international alliances and networks, among which the main are the International Domestic Workers Federations, HomeNet International for the home-based workers, StreetNet International for street workers. These are some examples of the alliances that have been supported by WIGO in order to echo the voice of the informal workers around the world. Now, I am going to present some good practices in several fields. And most of these good practices I've already presented in the previous webinars, but it's useful to come back to this in more details. And you will find other examples in our publication of RNSF. And the last and fifth webinar will be dedicated to good practices in general in various fields. So let's come to the first of these, which deals with campaigning and supporting the struggle of waste pickers of Bogota. You remember that in Bogota, it was decided by the municipality to privatize the public waste collections. And this threatened the livelihoods of some 15,000 waste pickers in the city because exclusive contracts was granted to private formal companies through public tenders. And the traditional waste pickers had no access to this tender. In response, The Association of Waste Pickers of Bogota, an umbrella association of cooperatives representing over 2,500 waste pickers, launched a legal campaign to allow waste pickers to continue to collect and recycle waste. And a landmark victory was achieved in 2003 when the Constitutional Court ruled that the municipal government tendering process had violated the basic rights of the waste picking community. And the court mandated that the cooperatives of waste pickers had the right to compete for the city tenders. So with the help of WIGO and other organizations, the Association of Waste Pickers of Bogota prepared a proposal for the tender that was renewed. And elements of this proposal were adopted in the official proposal made by the district agency in charge of the city's public service. So they obtained the right to continue to collect the waste disposals in the city of Bogota. But the struggle continued because of vested interests in the private sector that have mounted a political campaign to remove the current mayor of Bogota. They argued that the public management of waste collection and the involvement of the recicladores undermine free competition and are therefore illegal. You remember that unfair competition is often an argument of the formal sector to disqualify the informal sector micro businesses. So in this case, it was exactly the same argument that was used to disqualify the recicladores in Bogota. So the struggle has still continued, but until now, the recyclers of Bogota are still allowed to do their job in the streets of the city of Bogota, thanks to organizing, of course. So another good practice is, well, before I would like to show this table, which has been prepared by WIGO. It is in a publication of WIGO, where the issues, challenges, and counterparts of collective bargaining campaigns are described. This table referred to street vendors and home-based workers, but there are many others. For instance, domestic workers is another category which is not shown on this table. For street vendors, for instance, what are the priority issues? The first priority is to have the right and the space to vend, to have facilities for storage, for shelter, for toilets, and for access to water. To be protected against police harassment, to benefit of some safety and security, and access to credit. And the organizing challenges are not to be regarded as workers by selves and others. Another organizing challenge is the control exerted by politicians and mafias, the fear of harassments by authorities, the competitions among selves and with the formal sector, and time spent in organizing means loss of income, and the absence of forum for bargaining. And so the bargaining counterpart for this type of workers are the municipalities and the national and municipal policies and the suppliers and the buyers. Regarding home-based workers, the priority issues is to gain equal income and benefits as factory workers. A difficulty is the identification of the employer, the end of exploitation by intermediaries, because very often there are several intermediaries between the final employer, for instance, a multinational of textile or clothing, and the many intermediaries before the work of the home-based worker. Another issue is the access to regular work, to markets for own account and to credit. And the organizing challenges are that those persons are isolated in homes, invisible. They have generally a double time burden of work and home care for women. The fear of losing work. It is often an opportunity for children to work, because when the work is home-based, of course, many children can work invisibly. And another challenge is that they are unprotected by labor law, and they have a disguised status. And so here the bargaining counterpart are the contractors, the tripartite boards with the suppliers and the buyers. So another good practice that I have already described in a previous webinar is about social protection and the extension of coverage of social protection for the craftsmen and women of Côte d'Ivoire in EU-funded projects conducted by the Italian AFSI Foundation. You remember that the project has put in place savings and community solidarity groups, the GESCO, and through these groups are collected initial amounts and then weekly amounts that arouse emulation between villages. But despite the success of the approach, it would have been difficult, however, to reach the minimum amount necessary to create a mutual fund for the handicrafts, for the weavers, for the seamstresses, the furniture makers, etc. The final objective being to create a mutual fund by profession. But it would have ended into too long delays, which would have disappointed the strong expectations of the workers and would have weakened the trust of the population in a context where previous failures have left traces. Therefore, AFSI suggested to contribute with the funds collected to contribute to various existing successful and efficient regional mutual funds of agricultural planters, for instance, or other trades, and modulate the services according to the financial capacities of craftsmen and craftswomen. So it is a flexible model that can be adapted according to the regional opportunities, and it is a preliminary step towards an independent mutual insurance for crafts. In this approach, AFSI has been supported by the support program for the mutual health insurance strategies, PASS, at the regional level of the Western African Economic and Monetary Union countries. Another and final experience that I would like to stress is the experience of the delegation of the Organization of the Informal Sector in Togo, DOSI, which is an official office of the government of Togo. The DOSI tried to organize farmers, breeders, fishermen, motorcycle taxis, handicrafts, and traders in mutual associations, often leaning on pre-existing cooperatives that are vectors for capacity strengthening, acquisition of equipment, and above all, ensuring social protections. The principle is that the acquisition of means of productions with credit is submitted to the membership and to the payment of an insurance premium or social contribution to a mutual association ensuring health coverage and old age pensions. So once the credit is reimbursed, the social contribution continues to be reclaimed together with the membership fees. However, as the sense of belonging to a mutual association takes time, it is necessary to attach the social contribution to another regular expenditure for a service or a good that the association provides to its members. For instance, the seeds or the fertilizers for the farmers. The idea is to pay the social contribution together with the payment of these inputs that are necessary for the activity. And so, in this sense, the population gets the sense of membership and of the necessity of a regular payment in order to be socially protected. So these are a few examples that I have already mentioned in the previous webinars. And maybe, Paulo, you are going to add a little bit more from your Latin American experience.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jacques, very much for your presentation and your cases. Pierre, if I could have, thank you very much. You should see the presentation now, I think.
Yes, we do. We do.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so yeah, I would like to add an example that is taken from an EU-funded project in Bolivia. As Jacques mentioned, during the implementation of our project, the Research Network and Support Facility, we've been tasked to analyze EU-funded projects, specifically projects funded by the thematic program Investing in People. Why the thematic program Investing in People? Because this program used to have a specific focus on the informal economy, and among the priorities there was a specific stress on designing projects to support and to improve the living and working conditions of people depending on the informal economy. We have been analyzing specifically two call for proposals of the thematic program Investing in People. One was launched in 2009 and one was launched in 2014. For the project launched in 2014, we could also interact with the implementing organization during project implementation. These are projects funded in Latin America, Africa. One project is in India. We have a total of 15 projects in 13 different countries. One of them is implemented in Bolivia, and it's implemented by a foundation, a civil society organization called Fundación Fautabo, and they are working on this project at different levels. Today, I'm going to stress the elements that are more linked to organizing. Their project is realized in 2 municipalities. One is Cercado and one is Potosí, in Potosí and Oruro departments in Bolivia. And the idea of the project in general is to try to contribute to this socioeconomic empowerment of men and women, informal workers. When we talk here of informal workers, they have selected informal workers working as worker in some key sectors of the Bolivian economy, especially the construction sector, or informal micro enterprises. One of the things that I think it's interesting is that they selected as a sector, economic sector of activities, some sectors that are key sectors in the economy of Bolivia, and I think that gives also I think we can see this as the fact that the informal economy is contributing a lot to the wealth of a specific country. In many countries in Latin America, as example, in Bolivia, but also in Peru, you find out that in the key sectors of the economy, like the construction sectors, the mining sectors, transportation, services, you have a huge proportion of informal employment. So this informal employment is contributing to the wealth and to the national economy. And it's interesting to understand what are we doing to do for people who are contributing to the economy but don't get back a lot in terms of social protection, legal protection, decent working conditions, visibility, voice, negotiation power. And this project, I mean, also referring to what Jacques said before, might be a good example of how to work at the grassroots level, but also try to scale up what we do. An interesting aspect is that for this project, they selected as beneficiaries of the project informal workers and informal entrepreneurs who had already an experience in the sector. So we are not talking about a project doing, as example, vocational training for very young people, as in many cases we have seen, but of a project selecting workers who are already working in the construction sectors, as example, for 20 years, for 15 years, for 10 years, but they suffer from a lot of vulnerability. On the other hand, also in the case of micro entrepreneurs, they selected micro enterprises already existing production unit in some key sectors, food, textiles, metalworking, and they tried to support them at different levels. How? Of course, working on the skills development, on the improving of the production, on the innovation of the production. But these aspects, I don't want to focus on this aspect today. I would like to focus more on the aspects related to organizing informal workers and informal micro entrepreneurs. First of all, what they did, and I think also is something interesting when we think about future initiatives, they involved the Fundación Fautapo. They were able to involve the municipalities of Oruro and Potosí in the project. And the involvement of municipality was really key to guarantee the success and also for the future, the sustainability of this project. What they have trying to work at different level was on the facilitation of the registration process of micro enterprises, and that was done in agreement with the municipality and avoiding, I mean, a process of just controlling and going to the micro enterprises to impose on him or her taxes or rules and regulation. The municipality played a very interesting role because they tried to facilitate the process. They established a mobile unit to go directly to the micro entrepreneurs. Instead of having them coming to the municipality and wasting time and wasting the day of work, they access directly in the field together with the officers of FAUDAPO, the micro entrepreneurs. They explain the process and they also explain the advantages, because being registered also is a way to access social protection systems and mechanisms. So in supporting micro entrepreneurs in improving their skills, they also organized groups of micro entrepreneurs in order to discuss common issues, common problems. They organize meetings with the municipalities. And so this dialogue was part of the organizing the workers and facilitating the dialogue with the municipality for them to get registered and to get more access to social protection mechanism. At the same time, they also worked on the networking among micro enterprises, meaning facilitating cooperation among different enterprises in the business. So you would have as example 2 micro entrepreneurs working in the same sectors, cooperating to provide to the final client a more complete service, and so be more attractive. And also, and this is one other aspect that I think it's very important to highlight, this was for the informal workers, especially in the construction sectors, where you have up to 70% of the employment in the construction sector is informal in Bolivia. And so they trained the workers. They also started facilitating meetings among them. And through these meetings, they were trying to assess their needs, their situation, share problems. And that was a way also to organize them to start to have a common voice. And so that was also having a good effect in their bargaining power towards their employers. So at these 4 levels, facilitating the registration process, accessing social protection, networking in order to cooperate, doing business, increasing their bargaining power. These are 4 elements of this project that I think are very interesting. And this project will be part of an upcoming publication on the project funded by the thematic program Investing in People, where you will find this case study with a lot of more details, and also a series of also the other 14 projects funded by the program analyzed with the good practices and the elements that we could identify over these years of implementation. So going back to Jacques, after having seen a lot of cases of how to organize informal workers and different actors also involved in the field, I would like to ask you, Jacques, what are the conclusions? Is there any model that we can propose to people who want to work on organizing informal workers? What are the key conclusions that you can give us today?
Thank you, Paolo. So I will end the presentations by 2 slides of conclusions. For organizing in this matter, we can say that no one model fits all in terms of organizing informal workers. It must be recognized that what is needed is a change in mindsets of policymakers to recognize and validate informal workers as real workers through or despite the various forms of employment, relationships, or arrangements. And second, the change in laws, regulations, and policies to protect and promote informal work and their livelihoods. Third, activists in support of these vulnerable populations have to rely on pre-existing forms of organizations at best, or to build a consciousness of shared interests and concerns among these various categories of informal workers through campaigns oriented toward the gain of denied rights. For instance, the right to have access and make use of the public space for street vendors, or the right to be recognized as workers according to the labor law for domestic workers. Next slide, please. In many countries, there are such unregistered associations that function like cooperatives or trade unions, but they find it difficult to register as such. Organizational form follows organizational function. And I would like to conclude with the recent emphasis put on the social and solidarity economy and social enterprises that can provide the ways and means by which the transition from the informal to the formal economy can be achieved. It is a priority of the policy in Tunisia, for instance, and it is a way of scaling up the experience of grassroots organizations and NGOs at local levels. So the social and solidarity economy can be an important tool for scaling up the good practices at grassroots level and end up with a national policy that try to capture the world reality of informal work in a country. Thank you very much. And now it's open for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Jacques. And yes, now it's time for questions. And Pierre, are you collecting the questions, or we could try to also see if there is anyone who wants to raise his or her hand and ask questions? What do you think?
And we
have some time.
And remember that there were written responses on RNSF.
Sure.
Of course, for all the questions that we cannot answer today, as usual, all the questions that you have sent during the webinar will be collected by Pierre and answered by Jacques and published on our capacity for the dev group. But in the meantime, if anyone wants to ask a question, you're welcome.
So, Paolo, we got a few, more than a few questions from the participants during the webinar. I will try to gather them thematically speaking, let's say. Of course, if someone during the webinar, during this Q&A sessions wants to intervene directly, it's possible, but let's start maybe with the question we have already gathered. Okay. So first of all, there were several questions regarding strategies to organize and mobilize informal workers. For example, some questions were how to convince informal workers to participate in voluntary social protection schemes. Some other questions were suggesting possible strategies, like, for example, asking the question of whether formalization should be the priority in terms of strategy to address, to mobilize informal workers, or also if another strategy would be to link access to service and contribution to force the informal workers to organize. So these are, I would say, several questions. You can or address one of them, or have a more general comment on the most adapted strategies to promote the organization's mobilization of informal workers.
Jacques, please, if you want to start.
Okay, so about strategies to organize workers, informal workers, and how to convince them to contribute to social protection schemes. Well, this is a central question because we cannot imagine and consider that it is only redistributive schemes that should be proposed to informal workers. At national level, there must be a balance between services and benefits and contributions from the people. It cannot be only taxes that fund the social protection system. So the problem is how to convince the informal workers and more generally the informal sector operators to contribute to social protection schemes. This is not easy because they may have a previous bad experience in terms of savings and collecting their savings and not seeing the benefit of these. So this is why I repeated the good practices of AFSI, because they organized these saving groups, and among the population that save their meager income, they ask for who would like to use these savings in order to contribute to a social protection system, to a mutual fund. And as soon as the people see what are the benefits in terms of health coverage, there is an emulation between people, and they are more and more to decide that their savings should be dedicated to social protection contribution. So this is a good practice that can be observed in several other countries, and that should be highlighted. Now, regarding whether formalization should be the priority, or if there is a link between accessing and contributing to social protection system and forcing to organize. Well, it is not a matter of forcing to organize, but convincing. I think it's much more difficult for pensions because it is more difficult to see the benefits that are in a future that is not so near. But for health coverage, the organization is of primary importance in order to organize the collection of social contribution from poor informal workers. I don't know, well, I will see exactly the drafting of the questions, and I will try to respond more specifically and more in details on the website of RNSF.
Thank you, Jacques. I would like just to add something because, yeah, it's not easy to convince, of course, people, but for the health is easier because we have many examples, like in Kenya's example or in Peru, where the registration process was facilitated because through the registration you get access to health coverage from the state, and so that is an immediate benefit that you can see. It's a bit more complicated, as you said, Jacques, when you have longer term benefits that you cannot see now. We have an interesting case, actually, very specific, that we're going to present in the next webinar, but just to give you an example. In Peru, one project funded by the thematic program Investing in People, again, implemented by Progetto Mondo Mlal. They're working with coffee producers, informal coffee producers in Peru. And what they did, among other things, was organizing them to create a pension scheme. And the pension scheme is based on the utilization of natural resources present in the field, in the land of the coffee producers. So they are cultivating trees that are not in competition with coffee, and these trees will be generating in 10, 15, 20, 30 years an income, and this income is going to be the base for the pension scheme. So they're investing in their land, in natural resources, using trees that are in not in competition, but they integrate the coffee production, and organizing, in this case, workers into how do you say in English? Yes, into association for managing the pension scheme. They've just started, so they started creating the mechanism 2 years and a half ago, and it's very promising. And this is a very nice example of how to convince someone to invest in the long term, because they can see now that what they're investing on is their own land, their own. So they're planting trees, they're getting training on this, and in the future they will have benefits for their pension. But yes, it's not easy, I mean, to convince for longer term benefits.
So this is why the example of Togo is interesting. The contribution, the social contribution, is attached to the reimbursement of a credit. But the problem is, after the credit is reimbursed, how to keep the workers within the scheme, the social protection scheme.
Yeah.
This is why the idea was to attach the social contribution to the purchase of a current input of the profession. So fertilizers for farmers, for taximoto, it could be the purchase of gas, etc. You can imagine several options with the cooperative organization purchasing in bulk the input and reselling to the members this input in details with the collection of the contribution. And it seems to work well. The problem is that we have to find the type of input for the various professions. For some, it is quite easy. For others, it is less easy, but it can be found.
Yeah, I think, I mean, they need to adapt to the needs of each worker categories. It's a key. Pierre, you have other questions?
Well, we are running out of time, but maybe at least one last question. I have a few other if you want to. First of all, I want to do justice to the person who asked the question. She never said forcing, I did, and she was also focusing on more on convincing and by linking the contribution and the access to service. Regarding another interesting question is regarding the efficiency of the organization of informal workers. Are there models or approaches or methodologies which can help us to measure the efficiency of the organization and the mobilization of informal workers?
Well, for this, I would like to suggest to refer to WIGO's experience, and especially the publications of WIGO. You can go to the website of WIGO, and I would particularly recommend the publication that was prepared for the Human Development Report 2015. You can find this report of WIGO on the website of Human Development Report. You go to publications and to occasional publications, and you will find this report on organizing the informal workers. Well, it should be easy to find, maybe easier than on the WIGO website. WIGO website is wigo.org.
Thank you, Jacques. If I'm not mistaken, also WIGO produced a very interesting, it was a toolkit on how to organize informal workers with all the steps involved since the planning stage and then identifying the needs with the kind of table that you presented in your slide with the needs and then the different parties and the key action. Also, this one is available on the WIGO website. I can't remember now the exact title, but it's a toolkit on how to organize informal workers.
There is also a very interesting report of the ILO about organizing domestic workers that has been applied in Indonesia, which is a RAP model. We mentioned this in our report on good practices on policies in the RNSF report.
Okay, thank you. So Pierre, we're running out of time. We have to close. You are the timekeeper, so
maybe repeat how to get to the responses on the RNSF website.
Yes. Now, before closing, I mean, Pierre, maybe you can tell exactly. Please, Pierre, so you can tell what is going to happen with the question that we couldn't answer now.
Okay. So first of all, once again, thank you to all the participants, those who attended, and also all those who asked questions. As we were saying, all the questions will be gathered and published on our website, the ISF group, which you can find on the EU website, Capacity for Dev. It's also an opportunity for you to join our community of practice and follow our activities on this website, also on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. We will post afterwards both the recording of this webinar, also the presentation which were used, and for all the questions we will provide some elements of answers. I mean, the webinar is going to end soon. You will have a small survey, and we look forward to having you again for our next webinar on December 6th. And maybe Paolo wants to present a little bit more the next webinar.
Yes, thank you, Pierre. Well, thank you everybody for being with us, and we hope to see you on the 6th, December 6th. We are going to have this fifth and final webinar on good practices on the informal economy, and we will try to summarize the work we've done following this and analyzing projects, especially the one funded by the European Union on the thematic program Investing in People. And we hope to see you there. We have been working in different areas of the informal economy. So we will try to present the good practices according to different areas of research and topics. And we hope that this would be helpful for people who are interested and maybe working in this field. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jacques. As usual, it was really interesting listening to your presentation. And thank you, Pierre. Thank you again, everybody, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.